my veins. Blue and one, I red, white, and blue in my brain. I'm Bulldog born. Bulldog, that's my breed. I was born to follow where the Bulldogs lead.
Welcome back, everyone, to Inside the Kennel podcast. I love introducing this guy every week. I never get sick of telling you about these wonderful exploits. 350 games of AFL football, Charles Sutton medalist, Bulldogs captain. They struck a statue in his honour. It sits out front of a lovely pub in inner city Melbourne, and they named a wing after him. And that's not a wing of a hospital, that's the wing of the great Ted Whitten-Oval. Welcome, Dougie Hawkins. You're inside the podcast. Matty, how you travelling, mate? Who do we have on in this episode, please?
Well, welcome, Hawk. We have got absolute royalty.
Royalty.
Name, actually. It's the great Brian Royal.
Wow.
How was that?
Matty, Paul, where do you want me to start? I remember it was 1983. This young bloke called Brian Royal come from playing Bairnsdale or Barnsdale, we want to call it. And he arrived. I think correct me if I'm wrong, I reckon he's just come off a knee reconstruction.
Yeah, that's right.
At 18 or 17, 18, 19.
Correct.
And he arrived in 83. Now, I've got a feeling in 83, he won the best and fairest in his first year. Does that sound right?
Correct.
Well, and how many years did he play, Matty? What, 10, 11, 12?
He played 11 years. He played up until 1993. In fact, the year you're talking about, not only did he win the Charles Sutton, but he also won the Rookie of the Year, which is basically like the Rising Star Award in today's. So to come off a knee reco, go straight into league footy and explode, you saw him up close. That's phenomenal.
Well, I think, correct me, because you obviously have him on shortly. I don't reckon he was out of the top 3 in the best and fairest in his first 10 years. How's that? I reckon the last year or two that he had injuries and didn't play 21 or 22 games. I don't reckon he was, if I can remember now, out of the top 3 too often, if once, no more than that, in the best and fairest. And that's how I rate players, by their best and fairest tallies. I think that. And Brian Royal was just a star. He come along. He was a hard worker. Kicked the ball both feet. Had terrific balance. Loved the goals. Whoa. Handball, Choco. Shut up, Dougie. I said, hang on. What about handball and Choco? Shut up, I said. I'm going to have a shot for goal. I said, Choco, you're 80 metres out. He said, I'm still going to have a kick a torpedo, are you? I might step around him and play on. He loved the goal. He was around the goals, and he used to do the old, you'll love me saying that, he used to get the old head shaker going, and fantastic, great character, great bloke to play footy with. Again, a good leader, as he developed into his footy career at the Bulldogs. And the thing that I do remember a hell of a lot about Brian Royal is that when he put a big V on, he was fantastic. Boys, Paul, he was fantastic. When that big V went on with EJ, he played pretty well, didn't he?
Well, he played 8 games for Victoria, and one of the most famous games was 1986, where I think he kicked 5 goals, and he played on one of your old teammates, Brad Hardy, who was a reigning Brownlow medalist. So, it's a pretty tough opponent, and he was swapping with Lee Waitman on the ball, the forward pocket, and just absolutely destroyed him that day.
I reckon they both kicked 5 goals that day, the Flea and I reckon Brad Hardy won the medal.
Oh.
I'm not sure what the medal was called. Brad had about 48 possessions. I'm not sure. Brad couldn't give a care 1 inch about them. He just wanted to get the footy. Yeah. Well, I can't remember what was the medal called back then. Was it the Simpson medal or it was something like that in the carnival, and that game against the Bulldog against Victoria, when the Flea, Waitman and Choco kicked 5 on Brad, he got the medal. Brad Hardy.
So, I reckon Choco would have mentioned that a couple of times in the change rooms back at
yeah, let him know. Don't worry about that. But he was just a fantastic player. And again, boys, he just great with the young blokes, just great around the club. Loved footy. Just passionate about his footy. Played injured a lot. Not many blokes can do what he did. He played probably when he shouldn't have because of his courage and his character. He actually played injured a lot. You can ask him that too as well.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think he won the one best and fairest
Yep.
in his first year, but I reckon he was in the top 3 or 4 every year that he competed with the Bulldogs. Fantastic player.
Dougie, how do you come to a footy club? You'd have to be in rarefied air to come to a footy club in your first season and win in B&F. How do you do that? How do you have the confidence to go from playing
At
in the
Bairnsdale.
A-grades in Barnsdale or seniors? No doubt he would have been playing seniors in Latrobe. I know it's a good league, and then to go up 10 levels and then beat blokes like you and other great players at the time in the B&F. I don't know how that is possible.
Mm.
Paul, it was amazing, boys. It really was. And remember, he's a rover. He's only 5'9", 5'10", maybe 5'9". He was only he was a rover, and and probably played a fair bit of forward line as well as his on-ball stuff. So his first year, he wouldn't have played all of his game time on the ball. He would have spent a lot of time on the forward line. So to come out and win that best and fairest was just amazing. It really was. And again, I'll say it, towards the end of his career, it was sad that he was injured. I reckon he might have played 199 games and kicked 299 goals. Does that sound right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So, just one short there. And I was actually behind the goals at the Punt Road end. The Jollymont Road end. When he did his Achilles heel against Essendon in 1993 last game, I was right on the fence and just watched him go to lead. That was the end of his career there. And in true Choco's style, he just hopped off the ground all the way from the goal square back to the interchange bench, so his teammate could get on straight away. He's just courageous. Team first, and just a phenomenal player. But just one short of that 200 game, and as a fan, we just wanted to see him get out there and play that milestone match.
Yeah, you're right, Matty. Paul. I don't think he was the real super quick rover, was he? He wasn't really that super quick, explosive rover, but he just had that ability to get out of traffic and not get caught. He had the ability to go both sides, to go left or go right. And he can kick some freaky goals. Again, I think that 85 semi-final against North Melbourne when Simon kicked 100, I reckon Choco kicked 5 or 6.
Yeah,
He kicked 5, did he?
Yeah.
Kicked 5, Matty. He's kicked 5 goals in a semi-final.
Yes.
So there is a bloke. And again, I think it was 86 that Tony McGuinness may have arrived from Glenelg.
Yep.
And to have them two roving together, it was actually good to watch. As a winger, I was actually sat back sometimes and went, "Did you see that? How good?" I mean, it was just fantastic, and they both rove together very, very well. And we had with them two, roving it together. It was a pretty good, set up there in that late mid 80s, mid 80s it was. So, just again, boys, as far as I'm concerned, I played with Calvin Templeton. He was probably the best. Simon Beasley was just not far off Templeton. To some degree. Different type players, but Beasley was just a sensational player. And then I reckon it was nearly Brian Royal. How's that? But I got Grant. I got Chris Grant later. Yes. But Brian Royal would nearly be in my top 3 players.
Wow.
That I played with the Bulldogs. How much I rated Brian Royal. He was a superstar.
Oh, that is fantastic news, Doug. We love to hear that, and we also love to hear that door knock. That's Choco at the door.
Send my love to Choco, boys.
Will do. Well done, Dougie.
Thanks, Dougie.
Hey, Matty, good on you, Paul.
Okay, welcome back to Inside the Kennel podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I've got this amazing guest with an incredible resume. Listen to this. 199 games at the Bulldogs, 299 goals kicked, superstar, VFL Rookie of the Year in his first season, B&F in his first season, the Charles Sutton medal. He had what? B&F podium finishes in 84, 85 and 88, twice All-Australian, 87 Brownlow medalist, 8-time Victorian representative, rover in the team of the century, and Bulldog Hall of Fame. I'll keep going. The Kaiser of Gippsland, the Barnsdale Boomer, Brian Choco Royal. Brian, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much for that, guys.
Fantastic to have you on board, Choco. I think Paul just credited you with the 1987 Brownlow, but you were the runner-up. But you know what? There was probably 3 votes still in the tank there, but that would have been awesome.
Yeah, I mean, all that's so thanks for that. Going through my resume there, you sort of forget about some of those things. And certainly I think in '85 when Brad Hardy won it, I got fourth. Obviously that was a really good year for the footy club. But year '87 coming up, runner up. It's never easy, those sorts of things. So it brings back fond memories.
You'll take a Brownlow though if I offer you one though, won't you, Brian?
Oh, Paul, absolutely, every day of the week. I'm jealous of those guys who've won of those over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Choc, just before we start, we'd love for you, in your own words, to describe yourself as a player. A lot of our viewers are, millennials, younger people who possibly didn't, never got to see you play aside from a few YouTube clips. So how would you describe yourself as a player? And would you connect yourself with any contemporary or current day player at the Dogs?
Oh, really? I think that it's really difficult when you're trying to compare eras. But I guess myself, I come from Bensdale and I actually played majority of my senior footy in the country on a wing. So to come to the Bulldogs, I was at the time there wasn't they weren't a great side and probably didn't have a lot of great midfielders. So I was thrown straight on the ball. So I was back in the day, I was the rover. So the rover, you called the shots. So if you were named as the rover, you could run your race. And I probably spent 70% of the time in the early days playing on ball as the rover and 30% changing forward. I was fortunate. In my second year, we had Mick Moldhouse the coach, and I did a lot of work with Mick with my overhead marking. So I could then go forward and they'd match up blokes size to size. I knew I could compete in the air and on the ground comfortably with them, and that's why I could kick so many goals. So I was a bit of a hybrid player back then. You don't see, and that's where it's hard to compare because I think I averaged 1.5 goals a game.
Yes.
Which is for a midfielder in this day and age, they just don't go and kick goals. I kicked 7 goals, I think, on 2 or 3 occasions. I would have kicked 5 goals on I don't know how many occasions, lots of them. I kicked 5 goals in a state game. Yes. Changing, playing rover and changing forward. So it's hard to compare because I guess Bontempelli does it these days, plays in the midfield, but certainly he's a lot taller than me. Yes. I probably played a little bit like Tom Liberatore as a midfielder, in and under, got the ball out. Although I didn't have a lot of handballs, I certainly won a lot of won a lot of my own footy. So but as I said, guys, it's hard to compare.
Sure.
Brian, when you talked about working on your marking really quickly with Moldhouse, what did that mean? I mean, you would have been a very highly skilled footballer. What did he teach you about your marking? Was it your body position, or was it getting your fingers behind the ball? How did that process work?
Yeah, it was actually quite funny because it probably was a lot of teaching in it because back in those days we used to go out, prior to training, we'd just go out and have kick to kick basically for half an hour, 45 minutes before training. And Mick was. I played on Mick in 1983, and then he was my coach in 1984. So he was still physically capable of being able to compete, and it was more of just a competition back then. It was him trying to beat me and me trying to beat him. So that was basically it. It wasn't not that he really taught me anything. We just become competitors, and you just got better by doing it, I guess.
Wow. Brian, tell us about your background. So when we have a lot of our guests on, they often talk about being at great football clubs as juniors, having a dad that was their mentor, or having other mentors or uncles. What was your background? What was your growth as a footballer in the great Latrobe Valley in Barnsdale?
Yeah, well, I was born born in Bensdale and started my footy career at a really young age. I think it was 8 or 9 years of age back then. In those days, you just played under 16 footy, so that was what you played. There was no age level. That was it. You played under 16, and then you went to thirds, which are under 18 footy. So I played at a really young age. I was fortunate. My dad coached me for a lot of those years, so he was very strong on me being able to kick both sides of my body, and that's why I was very adequate at both levels once I got to Melbourne. But I was fortunate that I started playing senior footy in the country, albeit I was still small, at 15 years of age. I think in my 15th year, I played 2 senior games, and from 16 onwards, I played the majority of senior games. So,
wow,
that put me in really good stead to go to the Bulldogs. I had I had a knee reconstruction when I was 18. I would have probably come to the Bulldogs earlier, but I missed a year because of the knee reco, and then obviously come to Melbourne after that. But a funny story, I did have an opportunity in 1980 when Royce Hart was coaching. Back in those days, you could actually get a permit to come to Melbourne and play. And obviously, Footscray was my zone in Latrobe Valley. And I got a phone call late on the season in 1980, and it was Royce Hart. It was a Wednesday night. And my dad said, Royce Hart's on the phone. I thought my mates were taking the piss out of me, to be honest. But sure enough, it was Royce, and they'd selected me to play in the wing in the seniors the following weekend. Unfortunately, believe it or not, guys, I had to decline. At that stage, I'd hurt my knee. I didn't realise how bad it was. In those days, the country doctor just thought I'd pinched the cartilage. It was blowing up, and I just thought at the time it probably wasn't worth the risk because I wasn't 100% fully fit. In saying that, our team, Bensdale, were going really well at the time. We ended up going on and winning the premiership, and it's still the only premiership to this day the club's ever won. So I'm quite grateful that I was able to play with the injury, which turned out to be a knee reconstruction at the end of the year, and but didn't get the opportunity to play the Bulldogs early on. But it might have been a blessing in disguise. I could have gone down and not performed because of my dodgy knee.
Wow. Well, you certainly got to play in a premiership team with Tommy Alvin, but I guess if you had played that game, you would have tipped over the 200 game mark, Choco. What were you thinking?
Matty, I might, but then again, I mightn't have gone any good either. They might have given me the flick and gone back to Bensdale. Never made the big league, mate.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, can you tell us about how you did arrive at Footscray? Because it was 3 long years later in 1983, or I presume, in the summer of 82-3.
Yes.
How was it to arrive at the Dogs, and who were the sort of characters upon your arrival that you bonded with?
Yeah, it was. I don't know whether you guys know this, but I was actually a Bulldog supporter growing up.
Yeah.
So my mum, as a young girl, was born in Footscray. So and it was just over the Geelong Road Bridge, basically just over the road there, not far from the ground. So we often would come to Melbourne to see my rallies. And my old mum moved to the country, obviously, as a young girl, but we still had rallies in Footscray. So I would often be going to the ground, walking over the bridge and going to the Western Oval back then, and watching the Dogs play. So it was a huge thrill for me to be able to go and play for the team I barracked for. So I was really fortunate. And my early recollections was I was a Georgie Best fan. I had number 6 on my jumper. I loved Georgie, but then when Georgie finished, GJ Jennings was my idol. And when I went to the Bulldogs, Jeff was the captain of the Bulldogs, and for me to be playing alongside my idol was a dream come true. But obviously the Hawk was, he was a couple of years older than me, but I was an apprentice carpenter back then, and my first 3 years at the footy club, I was the maintenance carpenter at the Whitnall.
Yes.
And Dougie was and Dougie and the McPherson boys. I think Stevie Wallace at the time, quite a few of the boys were the promotions officers. We didn't get a lot of work done. We played a lot of indoor cricket, and Dougie actually owned a house not far from the club in Barclay Street, and so we'd often head over to Doug's house, watching movies and other things, and having lunches over there and that sort of stuff. So that was my first 3 years. So I was fortunate that I really got to get some really close friendships who I still have to this day from those first few years.
Brian, you come down to the club for your first season. You audaciously win the best and fairest, and then 16 games later, you're wearing the big V. You must have pinched yourself. Where on earth did you get the confidence to come down from Barnsdale? And I know that league's a very good league, a very tough league, and just assume a level of superiority. Tell me about that process.
Yeah, and I was only 177 and probably 177 centimetres tall. And I think when I first come down, I was only about 70 kilos. I ended up getting my weight up to about 78 kilos. But early days, I was still quite light. But in saying that, the four years of senior footy that I played in the country really, no doubt, helped me prepare myself to be able to walk into league footy. Now, I never thought I was going to be able to do that, but I did. I was fortunate. I won the best and fairest my first year, and as you said, after 16 games playing for Victoria, but I've got no doubt a lot of that was attributed to my senior experience in the country.
What was the step up like? Talk us through. Was it the speed? Was it the fact you were surrounded by good players that helped you? You were obviously roving. You said you spent 70% of your time on the ball. Tell us through the process of who helped you along that process.
Well, I mean, it was one of those things where I was always really driven as a youngster. Ever since I can remember, I just wanted to play VFL footy, which was known back then, and so I was preparing for it. I'd been preparing for a long time. I had the hiccup of the knee reconstruction, which back then it was really hit and miss, but that just motivated me more. Believe it or not, I had a lot of people, not from my own hometown, but people in the Latrobe Valley saying I was never going to make it because I was too small. So there was always that. I won't tell you what I really call it. There was always that reason to prove people wrong. Yeah. So that was certainly a motivation for me. I had in my first year, I had Ian Bluey Hampshire. Bluey only lasted for the first year, but he was fantastic for me. And the club was so welcoming and so inviting. And I was fortunate. I had relatives who lived in the area, so I moved in with them. So I was really comfortable in the environment. So it was all set up really well for me. And, I was just fortunate. I was fortunate to probably play some practice matches where I did well, and then got an opportunity in round one and just didn't look back. I think I played 21 out of I think I played all but one game. I reckon I might have missed one game with a corky, I think. Yeah. But I was really fortunate.
Yeah, you played 21 games in your first year, 22 in your second, then 25. And that 25 year was the year that I fell in love with the club, 1985. It was just a sexy time of footy. We just played with spirit and sass, and you were right in the thick of that. Can you tell us how that 1985 season unfolded, Choc, and some of the highlights that stand out for you?
Yeah, well, no doubt. Obviously, with Mick Moldhouse as the coach, when Mick come in 1984, he'd never coached before, but what Mick done, his ability to be able to, I guess, just more the professionalism. Not saying that Bluey didn't coach that professionalism side of things, but Mick was unbelievable. Mick, he had the ability to be able to get the absolute best out of everyone, not only as a team but as an individual. I've got no doubt. I owe a lot of my footy career to Mick Moldhouse and his ability to be able to work with me, get the best out of me. And obviously, in 85, we just put it together. We were still a relatively young side. We didn't have a heap of old players. I think, it was just exciting, and not to go all the way was obviously shattering for us, because we'd beaten Essendon a couple of times that year, so we felt we were in a really strong position to play him if we meet him in a grand final. But unfortunately, we couldn't get past Hawthorn in the preliminary final.
Yeah, and Dougie talks a lot about that final series. He says he felt it was his best game that he ever played was the semi-final against North Melbourne. And of course, in the best and fairest that year, he went on and got best on ground in all three to
every game,
to jump over the top of yourself and Brad and probably Steve Wallace as well for the BNF that year. But you yourself had an incredible series. Can you tell us a little bit about those matches? Obviously, we got belted against Hawthorn, but we turned things around against the Kangas.
The first one we did, but and it was really. You're right. I think I got tagged in the first final against Hawthorn by Richard Loveridge, but I still had a pretty good game. And I eventually started getting tagged most weeks. The next game against North Melbourne, I was fortunate. We just had a really good day that day. I kicked 5 that day as a midfielder, changing forward. And as you said, Dougie was just outstanding. And then unfortunately, the following week, we just couldn't get it done, which is a real shame.
Yeah, so tell us about that game against Hawthorn, because we're 10 points away from a grand final. I've heard you talk in the past about, not having regrets, but, was that one that just got away?
Oh, no doubt. I think it was, from memory, I think Lee Matthews was at the end of his career.
Yeah.
In 85, and I think he may have come on and kicked a couple late and might have been the difference. But it was, it's sort of, it's such a long time ago now, guys, to go back and try and pick apart the game. But it was certainly, was it a regret? Absolutely, it is a regret, because as I said, we had the wood over Essendon that year. We went on to finally win it.
Yes.
Brian, let me tell you, can you remember round 13, 1986? You play Fitzroy. Brian, tell us about that day.
You kicked 7 goals, Choc.
Now, do you remember that day, Brian? You're talking about. Do you remember that?
Oh, well, I know. Well, I remember kicking 7 against Fitzroy, but I couldn't have. Maybe it's I won't say the head knocks that I've had over the years. I can't say that these days.
That's topical.
Yeah, it is. But as I said before, I think there was 2 games where I kicked 7 goals. I reckon that game, it was come up somewhere. I don't know. Every now and then with Fox footy and all this sort of stuff, games come up, and I reckon I might have had 38 possessions and kicked 7 goals, but I don't reckon I got a Brownlow vote. I can't remember anyway, but obviously
that's right. Max Crowe got a vote. Dougie got 2. And Ricky Kennedy, playing full-back that day, got 3 votes.
Are you kidding me? So Rick Kennedy's got more votes than me. It's a wonder he hasn't. I was still good mates with Rick. It's a wonder he hasn't still reminded me of that. But so it's actually quite amazing, isn't it? It come up somewhere, and I was actually coaching. That's right. I was coaching a Vic Metro side, and some of the kids in the Vic Metro side just don't know who you are, or would never have seen you play. And I think 1 week Dangerfield might have kicked 5 goals and had 30, and I told him the story about me kicking 7 and having 38. So you compare, you say that's Dangerfield, that's what I was type thing. Trying to pump myself up, of course.
You trumped him there for sure, Choc. That's for sure. And 1986, you were all Australian that year. So what an incredible year you had. That year, we had so much confidence and hope, following on from 1985, but it wasn't to be. We had a lot of injuries, in the preseason. Lully Bama went down, Porty, Dougie obviously did his knee. So things just sort of fell apart a little bit towards the end, and it culminated with a big kind of blow up with between the coach and also the Brownlow medalist. Was this a case of player and coach just being on different pages there with Mick and Brad, or was there something else?
Oh, no, there's no doubt. It was just, I don't think there was anything else. It's just certainly the coach and the player being on different pages. There's no doubt about that. As we know, Brad was quite an offensive back pocket player, liked to get a bit of the footy and liked to run off. And I think Mick, being a back pocket player himself, felt that obviously your first and foremost thing you do is stop your player from getting kicks and kicking goals. And I think there's no doubt that was a reason behind it. Brad probably did a little bit of what he wanted to do, and Brad, don't worry, Brad did that very, very well. But certainly, I think Mick was certainly, as a coach, he wanted Brad to play a different style. I don't think Brad was prepared to do that. And the day that Brad took his jumper off at Waverley, that was obviously the nail in the coffin, obviously, for Brad.
Yes.
And I think I was injured, and I had to go back on the ground when Brad came off.
Right.
That day, waved his jumper, whatever he did. I do have memories of it, but obviously that didn't go down with Mick. And if you got on the wrong side of Mick, it was really hard to get back on the good side of him.
Yes.
Choco, through the 80s, you played a lot of state representative football. Tell us about one of the highlights of the 1986 game where you kicked 5 goals on the aforementioned Brad Hardy. And also, we've done our research, mate. And also the smother from Wayne Blackwell, who performed the smother on you, restricting you for kicking six, I imagine. Can you remember?
Yeah, I do. First the Brad Hardy story, because I bring up that quite often. Because that state game, for whatever reason, that state game gets played a lot. I think purely because there were so many goals kicked in it. The other side of the story is Dale Waitman kicked 4, and me and Flea were changing off Brad. Now, Brad denies to this day that we kicked 9 on him, but certainly Flea and I have got very, very strong memories of us kicking 9 on Brad. But Brad won the medal for the W. So this goes a little bit back on the way I was talking about how Brad played. So Brad won the medal for the best on the ground for the Western Australians, and then I won the Vic medal, which is now called the EJ Whitten medal. I won that for us. I won this big boombox thing. I don't know whatever it was. I won, and I should have kicked 6. It was one of those ones where, geez, I was just lazy. It was like that Wayne Harms one in that grand final where he's come out of nowhere and smothered off my boot. But anyway.
Oh, you did a beautiful sort of sidestep, and you almost put us in front because we were trailing by 3 points, weren't we? We ended up not prevailing, but on Brad just for a moment, the only player to get awarded for best on ground for having 9 goals kicked on him. We can't wait to ask him when we get him on this podcast.
Oh, don't worry, Matty, he'll deny it. I'll keep telling the story, and so does Flea.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, in 1987, you were the runner-up, as we talked about for the Brownlow medal. It was a year of almosts. Can you tell us about that campaign as a team? Because it went right down to the wire, and we ended up playing Melbourne from memory in the final round at Western Oval.
Yeah,
which
that's correct. Yeah,
cracking game. What are your memories of that match, Choc?
Well, the memories of I think from memory, there was a game being played at the same time as us, which was, I think they had to lose for Melbourne to get in, and so on and so forth. So
Geelong Hawthorn. That's right.
Was it Geelong Hawthorn? Yeah. And I think we could hear the crowd did roar or something like that, and we knew obviously the result went the way of which Melbourne wanted it. So and obviously in the end it didn't go the way we wanted it. So it was disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. That year we had a really good list profile. I guess that was another one that was very close to, for us to go into the finals. You think, that was a chance of us moving forward? Obviously, Melbourne beating us, they got to the grand final themselves, or, very nearly. I think maybe that was the Buckenara year where there was.
That's correct. Yeah. Jimmy Stein.
They were a very good team. So, was that a side that I guess could have prevailed or gone a little bit further?
Oh, no doubt. We were really fortunate. In that mid '80s period, we had some super players playing for our footy team, some really, really good players. And again, we weren't that old. So I think we'd lost Jimmy Edmund. I think we lose Jimmy Edmund at the end of '85, but we picked up Phil Malin and some other really handy players as
McGuinness.
well. Yeah, McGuinness, that's right. McGuinness come in '86, I think. So we were ripe, and Mick. Mick was a brilliant coach, and Mick, if it was a top 8 back then, who knows if we might have got the opportunity, but unfortunately things didn't go our way.
Yes.
Hey, Brian, I've been dying to ask you this question. Is there any truth to the fact that Kevin Sheedy tried to lure you and Dougie Hawkins to Windy Hill? Is there any truth to that?
Well, it was sort of there was always a lot of the first poach come from Jeffrey Edelson. So I had a chance to go to Sydney Swans when Jim Edmund went to Sydney Swans. Wow. So that was the end of '85. He was throwing big money around, a lot more money than we were on. But moving to Sydney, moving interstate was always going to be really difficult for me, being a country boy. So that didn't happen. Certainly Sheedy, yeah, absolutely it was. And then an opportunity to go to Collingwood in 1989 in the merger year also happened and was quite strong at the time too. So, but you know what? I'm so glad that I stayed at the Bulldogs. To be a one club player, I get so many. I get so much joy now just being able to go to the Bulldogs. I get invited to a lot of things. because I'm seen as probably a legend of the footy club, which, and things like that now are really special for me, to catch up with players, to be able to rub shoulders with the current players and the current people of the footy club, and be remembered and revered as you are. So I'm so glad I did stay and didn't leave, because it's now it's now a life for me, basically.
And Brian, do you feel like back in those days, and even today, but back in those days that when players did take that money, and I imagine Edelston's money would have been almost twice as much as what you were getting, or something?
Yeah, it was. It certainly was twice as much. Yeah.
That does, in your mind, have an effect on their reputation, or maybe their affiliation with that footy club?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, the late Barry Round, so Roundy left the Bulldogs, but Roundy still went to a lot of our past player stuff. So I see him around the club. Gary Dempsey's still involved. Bernie Quinlan's still involved. So probably yes and no in some ways. Some players will come back. I don't see Jimmy Edmund. Jimmy Edmund doesn't come to many or anything that I've been to. So it probably affects some individuals, but some individuals probably feel that they can come back.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, Choc, we're so glad you stayed. It sounds like you may have had an opportunity to go to Windy Hill or other club and maybe, have a premiership medal. But you know what? Thank God you stayed, and you are a legend at the club to us. So, you're a Bulldog through and through. All your games, all your times there. So we wouldn't trade that. That's for sure. We want to talk a little bit about 1989 because that season was precarious, wasn't it? And come October 3rd. Of that season, the headlines read that, we were merging with Fitzroy. As a senior player of that time, what do you remember about the fight back, and what did you have any sort of important role, I guess, with galvanising the players and keeping morale up?
I guess to start with, what I vividly remember is the effect that it had on the supporters. So that was the one memory that'll stick forever and a day, to be able to, to wherever you went in the western suburbs, to have grown people crying because the club was supposedly going under, or we were going to merge with Fitzroy. So that to start with was that was shattering to see. The next was there was a lot of confusion amongst the players. What's going to happen? Who's going to get selected in this team? What's going to happen to the rest of the players? So there was a lot of that going on. So. And there was a lot of unknowns. No one knew. And obviously until the club, Dennis Gallimberti and his crew got involved and started to get the ship back on track, I guess, and start to get some stability in the footy club. And obviously then wheels got appointed, and everyone started to feel comfortable again. And it went from such a sad situation to a really exciting situation.
Yes.
Brian, so the 1999 rolls around. The following year, you have a new coach in Terry Wheeler. Firstly, what was your relationship like with Wheeler, with Terry opposed to Malthouse? I know that we've heard from, say, Terry Wallace, who talk about Wheeler bringing a sort of a process to the way you played your game, a little bit more modern approach. And how were you feeling at that time personally?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. So I got on really well with Wheels as teammates. Really well. He was certainly a father figure to me in my time when he was there. It was quite interesting. So when Wheels came and coached, and you're spot on, Wheels was before his time as a coach. Back in the 80s, certainly in the mid to early 80s, there wasn't a lot of structure. You just went out and played your game, and we certainly had some setups and that sort of stuff. And Mick was really disciplined. Really strong with his disciplines, but that was more tackles and not going to ground and just the basics. Wheels come in and started putting a lot of structures in place, and it was one of those things where early days I probably struggled with it, because I probably had 8 or 9 years where I could sort of run my own race in a way and play the way that I wanted to play, and all of a sudden Wheels has come in and we've got a boundary throwing, and you've got to stand there, you've got to stand there, and you've got to stand over there, and one back there, and then we handball and we get out to here, and Simon Atkins is on the end of it, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm going, why am I standing there?
Right.
I'm standing there. I know I'm not going to get it. So that was me trying to get my head around structure that he had in place, and so we butted heads a bit early days. It was difficult. He ended up moving me out of the midfield into the forward line, probably a bit more permanent. Tony Liberatore just started to come on the scene, so Liber started getting to become the rover, and I was sort of the second in line at that sort of stage. Probably lucky that I could go forward and kick goals, so that allowed me to stay into the side. But yeah, I struggled early days with Will's coaching, but he knows that. He probably was as stronger minded as I was, so we certainly butted heads.
Yeah, fantastic to hear that you moved forward, because that was a very exciting time in your sort of latter few years of your career. How was it? And Dougie says you didn't dish off the handball too often, so you did love a goal, Choc. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that growth under Wheels? Because we had a few lean years there, but 1992 became a year that was really celebrated. Can you recall that campaign and what unfolded?
Oh yeah, so Wheels is so unique. In everything he did, there was a reason behind it, and once I got my head around how he wanted us to play and the structures that he wanted to play with, I started to feel comfortable. But it was so good at just with team building opportunities. We did so many things. We went skydiving, we sailed on sailboats in the Gippsland Lakes. There were so many things that we did, and they were more team building opportunities. The skydiving, where we jumped out of an aeroplane and landed in Port Phillip Bay just off Williamstown. That wasn't about jumping out of an aeroplane. That was about following instructions. So on the Saturday we sat there for 10 hours and just listened and got taught how to jump out of an aeroplane. That wasn't just to jump out of the air. That wasn't just to do it the following day. That was about you understanding how to do it. And it taught me so much that day about not being scared to ask questions. If I didn't understand something, I'll say, "Oh, hold on, mate, I didn't get that. What do you mean?" And that was Wheels' philosophy around all that sort of stuff. So it was he was, as I said before, he was before his time.
Yeah, well, such a trailblazer, absolutely. And we saw the impact of that on the field, because I think we won 15 or 16 games that year and came into the finals looking red hot. Who were some of the stars that year, and how did you feel your campaign went?
Actually, Matty, I was sort of at that stage of my career. I was apart from the first 3 years working as a maintenance carpenter for the Bulldogs, and running my own building business, so I was on the tools throughout the course of the day in the latter part of my career, and then going to training and playing VFL footy on a Saturday. So it was quite onerous, I guess, on my body. And so I started to have a lot of back and hamstring related problems towards the end of my career. Yes. So that was certainly 92 and 93 in my last 2 years was really difficult because of trying to put games together, which made it, with obviously the hamstring injuries, which weren't serious injuries, but they were 1 weekers, and a little niggle would turn into 1 week, and you may miss 2, but I'd never miss 3, and I'd get back into the side, you'd play another 4 or 5 weeks, and I'd ping another hamstring. So it was really frustrating. So as much as a really successful year for the team, I probably didn't have the year that I would have liked, I guess. And I think I actually did my hammy in the first final of that campaign again and missed out in the preliminary final.
Yeah, you did. We, I think we went into half time in that first final against the Cats at 2 or 3 goals up, and you'd kicked 2 early goals in that match, and were looking sharp. And I think that season you kicked 42 goals. So you were good for a couple or 3 a game that season.
Yeah. But it was just, I guess, Matty, was probably for me, it was frustrating.
Yeah.
To not put games together. Yeah.
Brian, with that forward craft of yours, tell us about how you managed to kick so many goals. What was your tricks? What did you do as a forward? You had some good forward, big, strong forwards up there. What were your little tricks? Did you cheat and jump from behind? Did you read the ball and wet weather off the back, or what did you do?
Yeah, I did, Paul. I did a bit of everything, but the reason I'm laughing is because when I did in 92 and 93, when I did go and play forward more often, I would get the message from a runner quite regularly that I'm not the full forward, I'm the crunching forward. And back then, I think with John Ballantyne or maybe Danny Delray might have been the full forward. And I'm thinking, well, these blokes aren't leading. So I'm just going to lead. And often I'd be leading in front of them, taking marks, and the runner would come out and Choco, you're the forward pocket, you're not the full forward. So I could read the game, guys. I could read it. I was good when the ball was in the air, and I was equally as good when the ball was on the ground. And I was good at kicking goals either foot. So as I said, the early days with Mick just allowed me to extend my career in some ways as a forward.
Brian, do you see? I mean, you would have fitted in perfectly in today's footy. Do you sometimes look at today's footy? Your style of play would have fitted in beautifully with being a small forward.
I would have loved to play in the midfield. I've got 100 kicks, kicking backwards, sideways, and everywhere. If you were smart in this day and age, I could see how players are racking up a lot of the footy. But there's no doubt. With the way the game is played, such a possession game these days. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure whether I would have survived because my defence wouldn't have been as strong. I wasn't known to be a chaser and tackler, I guess. Which, if you're going to be a small forward these days, you've got to be able to chase and tackle, as you see Cody Waitman and these, Mitch Wallace when he was playing down there as well. They're so good at that.
Yes, you're renowned for your toughness, though, Choc. When young players came down to the club, were there any pups that you sort of took under your wing and imparted sort of your wisdom and the Bulldog way? I know that Scotty West recently sort of commented that you were one of those people that really instilled that strength and the Footscray style into him.
Yeah, probably Matty. My early days at the Bulldogs, probably what I admires a little bit was some of the stuff players were getting away with, and probably not as compliant, and training as hard or doing it the way the coaches wanted to go, and I was really strong. Certainly once I got established and become a leader of the club about the compliance and training as hard as you can train and playing the way coaches wanted you to play. So I did. Yeah, I felt that any young player had come into the club, if he was prepared to listen to me and take on advice, and I was prepared to work with him. And certainly, as you said, players like Scotty West and certainly Rowan Smith in his early days, I was prepared to work with those guys, and not only the smalls, but there was also, remember there would have been, say, a Stu Wigney or an Adrian Campbell, some of those younger kids. I just took them under my wing, on and off the field as well.
Yeah, brilliant to hear that, Choc. And look, your career ended as a player really, really abruptly. I remember being in the behind the goals the day that you played against Essendon, probably around round 20 in 1993. And I think we were streaming down the ground, and I was looking at you, and you usually be often leading, but you sort of were stagnant right on the goal line. And then I twigged that you obviously had done something. What happened there?
Yeah, Matty, I remember to this day. I was it's spot on. You're exactly right. We're playing at the MCG. We're playing Essendon. I was playing on Gary O'Donnell. Gary was a really hard player to play on, back pocket player for Essendon. And I just went to lead for the ball. Basically, I led, and then something happened. I thought I actually stood in a hole in the ground. I actually looked around, and there was no hole there. And I went to take off again. There was obviously nothing there, and I snapped my Achilles, which come out of the blue. I had no, previous issues of Achilles, but whether that was to do with my back and my hamstring, I'm not too sure. But so that ended my career.
So Brian, you were offered. Is it correct that you were offered to play a last game on the bench in '93, and you declined? Is that true?
No. There was a lot of talk around it, but I would never have done it. Listen, there was talk of doing it, but I was never offered it.
It would have been incredibly difficult with a snapped Achilles, surely, was it?
Well, it was more about just sitting on the bench and just feeling, just basically just getting on the team sheet. That would have been it. Yeah. But I wouldn't have done it.
And how did that have effect on your? We were talking to Acker, and Acker never had an opportunity to say goodbye to the fans. Did you feel the same way at all?
Well, I sort of did. You know, the last game of '93, I think Peter Foster might have also injured himself and played. You know, was ending up at that year. So we got an opportunity after the last game at the Whitten Oval to walk out on the ground and get acknowledged by the crowd. So that was, you know, I was on crutches and that was really good. It was very cheerful. You know, the club had organised a 200 game function for me as well, which obviously never went ahead. And you know, they had memorabilia made up for me and all this sort of stuff. But it is what it is. You know what? I'll probably get more recognition now for playing 199 games than I do 200 because I think there's only 2 or 3 of us.
And you're on more trivia questions than ever, are you, Brian?
Yeah, for the wrong reasons.
Choc, so you played, 11 seasons at the Dogs. Who were the standout teammates that you had, and the reasons why they loom so large in your memory and affection?
Well, no doubt the main one was Dougie. So Dougie was just superstar on the ground, but he was also just a brilliant person off the ground. And we become great mates purely for the fact, as I said, we worked together for 3 years at the footy club. So we just lived in each other's pockets on and off the field. We played together, we socialised together. One of my really good mates, or my best mate at the time, was Stevie Wallace. So Stevie and I, Stevie was from Leongatha. He'd just come out of the under-19s the year that I got to the footy club. So he'd just come into the senior program, and we just, for whatever reason, we just become attached straight away, probably because we were country kids, I guess, and probably from, he was South Gippsland, I was East Gippsland. So we become really good mates, and that friendship is still tied to this day. I was really fortunate early days at the Bulldogs. We had a lot of interstate players come to our footy club. Obviously Brad Hardy, Jimmy Sewell, Alan Daniels, Andrew Purser, Simon Beasley. There was a lot of interstate players, and we all lived around the Essendon area. Oh, Simon didn't. Simon lived in Toorak. He had his nose up out in Toorak. But the rest of us, Murray Ranch, come in for a few years as well. So we lived in the Essendon area. So the majority of us had partners as well. So we actually socialised all the time. Shane O'Sullivan, who was the general manager at the time, Shane lived in Essendon as well, and Shane was really good at putting on a party as well. So they were great memories and great times. But I was really fortunate to play with some really good players, and probably the one that probably doesn't get, there's a couple that I don't think get the full credit. One probably does, but Andrew Purse is the one for mine that goes under the radar a fair bit. I had a lot of time for Polly purely because, he was an undersized ruckman, obviously competing against a lot bigger blokes, but he was just a brute of a person and just such a great guy. And obviously, him being the ruckman and me being the rover, we combined really, really well together. But the other one was Simon Beasley. And I know Simon, I think within the Footscray Football Club and the Western Bulldogs community, Simon is held in really high regard, but I think outside that, he's probably not as much. He was a superstar as a player. For him to continually compete the way he competed is a beautiful kick at goal. I know we all hang it on Simon a little bit for, being the stockbroker and, he's now, whether he still does the punting or not, I'm not too sure whether he's allowed to or not, but Simon was a beauty as a player. Ricky Kennedy, Ricky was a nut. He's a Fruit Loop on and off the field. I often we'd go to the footy together because we lived in the same area, and to be in the car and see the road rage going to the game coming from Ricky Kennedy for a guy who didn't drink alcohol. Oh God Almighty, I'd hate to think what he'd be like with it. Peter Foster was a great player and I think very underrated. You'd speak to a lot of opposition forwards, and they would talk about the hardest opponents, and I reckon Peter would often come up in guys like Gary Lyon, Dermot Brereton would often talk about him being one of the toughest players. I was fortunate late in my career, as we talked about before, to have Scotty West. So Westy, I played some games with Westy and Chris Grant. So some really good talent throughout that. And I know I've missed a heap of players as well, but some incredible talent through my career.
Well, it's the who's who of Bulldogs really that you've listed there, and there are other players, as you say. You could go on with Tony McGuinness and
correct.
Person. There's the list goes on and on. Just what an honour it must have been just to pull on the Guernsey aside those chaps.
Yeah, well, it certainly was, and and as I said, and I think that certainly the mid '80s. One of the reasons we did have the success was we were so tight as a group. And that had a fair bit to do with Shane O'Sullivan, who was the general manager at the time. Shane was really good at getting everyone close, and not only the guys but also the partners as well. And would often, as I said, if it wasn't a party at his house, he'd be organising a restaurant to go to or a function to go to. So we stuck together.
How important is that, Choc? Because there was an interview this week, in fact, with Easton Wood and the Bont, talking about how Bevo and the success that the Dogs have had, and when they've been really close, like they were in 2015, 16, the success followed. You've been a coach, how important is that culture setting and that galvanised sort of relationship element?
Oh, it's huge. I think it's as important as anything on the field you do. To be able to build, I talk about now, I'm involved in our local footy club, Bo Morris, and I talk about with all the coaches about building relationships with the players, and that's the one thing I do know about Mick Moldhouse. Mick had that ability to be able to build a relationship with you, get to understand you, get to know your family. He was, from a holistic point of view, he knew everything about you, and I would run through a brick wall because of that. And then off the field, and we would play. For instance, Mick lived out in, I think it was Mount Waverley, and so every time we went out and played at Waverley, Stevie Wallace, his partner, myself, my partner, would always go to his house for breakfast on the way to the games. That sort of stuff, it just was unbelievable. You'd regularly be going around to different coaches' houses for dinner. It was a really good time for us, and some great memories. This brings back those sort of great memories.
Yes.
Brian, your career finishes. You've had a great career at the Bulldogs. You've just mentioned the great players and friends. You move into coaching. You're a passionate footballer. You want to carry on and move into the coaching realm. Firstly, what was the first thing you went to? And the cultural change, particularly when you went to other clubs.
Yeah.
What was the cultural change after being such a diehard Bulldog supporter? And how close were you to getting the Bulldogs job in that era?
So when I finished playing, I really had an ambition. I wanted to coach. So I went and coached. I went to coach Lean Gather in the South Gippsland Footy League for a couple of years, and I wasn't a great coach back then. It was it was one of those things. I basically just used my ability as a player to be able to instill some of the disciplines that I had, I guess, on myself into the team, and I actually won a premiership in my second year, which gave me the opportunity to then go and coach in the AFL for 21 years. The difference in clubs are all different. I was fortunate. My first coaching gig was the Bulldogs, so I coached with Alan Joyce. Joyce only lasted for, I think, half a year. Terry Wallace ended up becoming the coach, so Terry then coached with me for the next 3.5 years. So that time was fantastic because obviously 97, 98, 99 were some really strong years at the footy club. We took the club in 96 from second last, I think, to runners up in the following year, which is a huge feat because we were out and gone.
Yep.
And so our ability to be able to transform that within a year was outstanding, and a lot of credit obviously goes to Terry with that one. I then went to Melbourne to work with Neil Danaher. Melbourne Footy Club at the time had just been in the grand final. What year was that? So that would have been. So I went there in 2000. So it might have been 98 or 99. I'm not too sure, Matty. I know you're thinking there, but yeah, they were in the final. Well, might have been a grand final. Might have been in the finals. I think so. I went to Melbourne at a pretty good time. Yes. And we got to the 2000 grand final with Melbourne that year. I lasted 4 years there, and that was a really good time, Melbourne. Neil Danaher was a fantastic coach. I got along with him really well. The footy club was full of a lot of strong personalities. Gary Lyon, Todd Viney, Jim Steins were assistant coaches with us, or part-time assistant coaches. So as you can imagine, there's some really strong personalities there. The following year, I think in 2004, I went to North Melbourne and worked with Danny Laidley, formerly known as Dean. I had 1 year with Lades, and North Melbourne North Melbourne was a different footy club back then. They were, so again, had a lot of success in the early days, but were going through some pretty tough times. I only had 12 months there because North only had 1 year contracts. Terry Wallace ended up getting the Richmond job, and I get a phone call midway through that year asking me whether I wanted to come to Richmond and join him as a coach, which I didn't. At the time, I couldn't commit because I was still in a contract for North Melbourne. But I then went and coached with Terry for 5 years. Richmond was amazing. Yeah, just a different football club altogether. As you can imagine, the Tiger Army, it was exciting. Yes. I'd never seen so many people at a game before in my life. So that lasted 5 years. Where did I go then? I went to St Kilda. Had a year with Ross Lyon, which was the 2010 Tour Grand Finals.
Wow.
That was pretty tough. Ross was a hard coach to work under. I had a 3 year contract there, and I probably wasn't happy with. Yeah, I probably wasn't happy with the environment within the coaching group. So I left after a year, and then had another 3 years at Melbourne after that. So I had a long career, and seen a lot of different environments, a lot of different players, a lot of different coaches.
Wow.
And you applied for the top job on a couple of occasions. You know, I think you came perilously close to getting the Freo job, and I think the Doggy one as well. What was there a reason that just stopped you from getting it? We were so hopeful that you'd become the Dogs' top coach.
Yeah, Matty. The first one I went for was the Geelong one when Mark Thompson got it. So that was my first interview, and it had come down to Bomber and myself, and he obviously got the gig there. So that was really disappointing, particularly when you see these clubs go on and have success. Then obviously the Dogs, that was a really difficult one because I felt I was a really good chance for that, and obviously didn't get the opportunity. And I never went back and got any feedback, or they never gave me feedback on why I didn't get the role. But then, obviously the Fremantle as well. So, and that went to Chris Connolly in the end. And that, but guys, they were all really good experiences. I would have loved to coach AFL footy. I think I would have been really good at it. Am I disappointed I didn't get an opportunity? Yeah, absolutely I am. But I've been so blessed to have. I had over 30 years in the game as a player and a coach, and I was blessed to be able to have that as a huge part of my life.
Yeah, unbelievable, Choc. And you're still a Bulldog supporter today. I know that you attended the 2016 Grand Final. Can you tell us what that's like for somebody who toiled and was just a champion of the club, and so important in the culture building and our story, to be sitting up in the grandstand and to see that magical day unfold? Did you feel that, hey, I'm part of this victory?
Matty, it actually started the day before. A group of us caught up in the city at a pub. I think it was the Waterside, which Stewie Wigney had I think he had a part ownership in it. So a group of us caught up in the city, and you know what, Matty and Paul, I never, when I go out in public or go to the footy, I never wear a Bulldog cap or a Bulldog scarf. But that day, that Friday, I remember jumping off the train, I had a Bulldog scarf on, walking through the city, and to see so many people, or Footscray supporters with their kit on in the city on the Friday was unbelievable.
Yes.
And it just made me feel so proud to be associated with the footy club. And that was brilliant. The next day, the Saturday, I was a guest speaker at which club? I think it was the St Kilda Grand Final breakfast in the city. So my wife and I went to that first. So I got up and I spoke, and I was emotional. I spoke about the day before and what the day meant for me, and obviously for the footy club. And I was probably like everyone else. I thought, oh, how good's this? We've got here. If we don't win, it doesn't matter. You know, it was one of those. I think it was just typical the way we all thought, because we've been let down so many times. And then obviously to go to the game and to be able to sit there and sit with my family in the crowd and a lot of other Bulldog people, and just to sit there in the last part of the last quarter and go, well, we're going to win this. And it was so good. I was so proud of the footy club. I was really fortunate, guys, that I got invited to the function that night. So my wife and I had an apartment in the city, so we stayed in the city, got doled up, and obviously went to the Crown, went to the function. It was the best night I've ever had, you know. And I was on a table with a lot of ex-players, and it was, apart from Peter Gordon's speech, it was a brilliant night. He went on a bit, Peter, but anyway, that's Pete.
Yeah. What an incredible thing. So, what does a club mean to you then, Choc? You're a supporter, a champion, and you're a coach, and you've returned as a supporter. What does it mean to be a part of the Bulldog Army?
Well, it's just it means everything to me, guys. I couldn't. I go to as much. I don't go to a lot of games these days. I might go to 2 or 3 games a year. That's probably about it for me. I'm involved in my local community footy, so I commit to that a fair bit. So if it's a night game, I try and get to. But I try and, if I'm invited to go to something at the footy club, I always make a point of trying to get there, because it means a lot to me. So I'll do anything for them. I do a little bit of Luke Cleary, who's a Bowie boy. I mentor Luke a little bit. We catch up every now and then and have a coffee. So I do a little bit of that sort of stuff. So it's nice.
And look, Brian, you're much loved by the fans. So what sort of message would you send out to all the, and we know we're going to have a lot of people who are going to listen to this interview. What would you say to them around 2023 and just in general as a player, as a great player for the club?
I think I think it's exciting with what's happening at the moment. It's probably been an inconsistent couple of years for the footy club. But I think there's certainly some exciting times ahead for the footy club. You know, when you see some of the talent they've got, we're still a relatively young club. Hang in there, guys. I think we're gonna taste some success again. There's no doubt about that with what I'm seeing. I've got a lot of time for Bevo. I know him really well. Obviously, Chris Grant's still on board. So they're in a really good position from a leadership point of view. So yeah, let's just support them and stay with them.
Awesome. Before we get to the final part, which is the quiz, you just touched on the coach. I know that you had a little bit of an overlap with him playing. What was it like to play alongside Luke Beveridge?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. Bevo was. Bevo, I guess he would even say this. He probably wasn't the most talented player, but he was one of those guys who just give everything he had. And it's really, I'm so rapt for him to see him succeed as a coach, because he's very unique in what he does and the way he coaches. I live in the Bayside area. I'm a Beau Morris person. He was heavily involved in St Bede's Mentone Football Club. He lives not far from me, so it's great. I'm so rapt for him to have the success of footy coach. Yeah,
wonderful, Choc. Well, you know what? You're in the hot seat now, Choc, because we have got the quiz, and it's the Bulldog Brain Quiz. And can I preface this by saying, Dougie Hawkins is sitting on top of the leaderboard. And at the end of this season, at the end of this year, we're going to choose the top 2 players, the top 2 ranked players, and you're going to go head to head. So we're putting all our faith in you today. The winner overall is actually going to be winning a portrait of themselves done by Noel Brazizi, who actually did all the graphic work for the Dogs for the 2016 Premiership banner. So he's
okay.
an incredible artist. And if you were to win it, you'd get your own portrait painted, and it's yours to keep, Choc. So there it is.
Thanks, Matty.
Straight to the pool room, Choc. Straight to the pool room.
Straight to the pool room. So you've got. We're going to give you a little bit of power. You can choose which topics. I'm going to give you two choices. You can select either the 2016 final series, which you've just spoken about, or the 1980s. That's the whole decade, Choc, and you were there for 7 or 8 of those years. So which one will it be?
Oh, 1980s.
1980s. That's fantastic. All right, wonderful. Just let me close that screen.
Right, mate. Please knock Dougie off, please.
All right.
He's been posting about it ever since, Choc.
All right, Choc. Well, good luck. Your time will start after I finish the first question. So best of luck. All right. The Bulldogs made the finals only once in the 1980s. Is that true or false?
That's true.
Correct. Peter Foster won the 1989 Charles Sutton Medal. True or false?
False.
Correct. It was Terry Wallace. Steve Koliniuk's first game in 1987 was a drawn match. True or false?
False.
No, it was true. Which coach did Mick Malthouse take over from in 1984?
Ian Bluey Hampshire.
Correct. Which number did Zeno Tatzaris wear mostly throughout the 80s?
36.
48.
Oh, no.
Which player captained the club between 1986 and 88?
Ricky Kennedy.
Correct. Which were the 2 Bulldog Brownlow medalists of the 1980s? There were 2 of them.
To Brad Hardy.
Correct. And the 1980 Brownlow medalist was?
Calvin Templeton.
Correct. Which player won the 1987 Best and Fairest?
Terry Wallace.
It was McGuinness. And which year did Steve Wallace debut on the siren there? Which year did Steve Wallace? Say that again.
1983.
He's got it. Well done, Choc.
Is that for Dougie? No.
And the scores are coming up on the board right now, Choco. You're in second place, 13.
I'm getting used to second place.
Second place. At this stage, you're in the grand final with Dougie. I'll tell you what, Dougie said, if anybody knocks him off, let him know, because he wouldn't be best pleased. So well done to leave him on top, but you're in the grand final at this stage.
Thanks, Matty.
Okay.
Fantastic, Choc. Well, Choc, we want to say from the bottom of our heart, thank you. You were my personal idol growing up. You came to my 13th birthday after my mum wrote a letter to you, and you surprised me in Melton and turned up at my birthday. I don't know if you remember that, Choc, but it was, a real highlight of my life.
Is that correct? I remember. I actually remember going to quite a few kids' houses for birthdays.
Yes.
Wow, how good is that? Thanks,
that was
mate.
in Melton. It was my 13th, and you then became, just elevated in my mind, and you're already my hero. I interviewed you for my year 10 work experience for Melton Radio. So you've been just a real inspiration to me. I used to have a lot of banners that I used to carry, including "Hit This Choco," and you actually kicked a goal and hit it and turned around and gave me a thumbs up.
Oh, that was yours. You remember the banner? My mum loved it. Yeah. Yes.
So this is a real honour for me and Paul as well. So thank you, Choc. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Matty. Thanks, Paul. Really loved it.
Go Dogs. Brian Choco, ladies and gentlemen.
My heart, white in my veins, blue in one eye, red, white, and blue in my brain. I'm Bulldog